Welcome, everyone, to the USS Constitution Museum's Maritime Movie Club discussion of Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. I have to say, I think that song is now going to be stuck in my head throughout this entire presentation, Carl.
And maybe the rest of the week, yeah.
There are worse things that could happen. So this is our second Maritime Movie Club presentation, and strangely enough, both of them are movies from 2003. Though I have to say, I think there's probably a lot of differences between Master and Commander, our first club discussion, and Pirates of the Caribbean. Just a few differences.
Just a little bit indeed. And we're going to talk about those differences today and sort of the fantastical nature of the movie, but where it does have some basis in historical reality.
Yeah. So before we officially start kind of getting into the discussion, I just want to point out a few things on Zoom for you all to be aware of in terms of how you can interact with both me and Carl throughout the presentation, as well as amongst your fellow attendees. And that is through the two buttons that you'll see on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So there is a chat button, so that will allow you to chat with not only us as panelists, but also amongst the attendees that are in attendance today. And thank you, Ed Sevilla, for a yo-ho, yo-ho. And then we also have a Q&A button, and that's to submit your questions to the host. So we hope that you submit those. Thank you to everyone that submitted your questions during the registration process. We have those, and we'll be discussing some of those questions throughout the presentation.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun topics to talk about over the course of the day, including Disney and sort of the origins of original pirates. By the way, I don't know if you said it, my name is Carl Herzog. I'm a public historian for the USS Constitution Museum. And Jennifer, I think I stepped in a second later.
No, that's okay. I think I forgot to introduce myself. I was into the yo. My name is Jennifer Zanoli. I'm the manager of interpretation and visitor services here at the museum. And yeah, we have a lot of fun things to discuss today. And I know actually a couple of people were wondering, why are we doing Pirates of the Caribbean here at the USS Constitution Museum? And I think both me and Carl in our different jobs here at the museum have bumped into the question of pirates and kind of what people imagine it was like out on the high seas and how it relates to USS Constitution. I know that whenever I show an image of USS Constitution to a group of school children, they immediately think that it is a pirate ship.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing in that regard, right? Like every square rig sailing ship in popular imagination is a pirate ship by definition almost. And I think that speaks volumes to sort of the hold that this, that this depiction of pirates has on our culture.
Mm-hmm.
So
do we want to start talking a little bit about that popular imagination of what those images are of pirates?
Yeah, well, that's actually the funny thing about the whole pirate story, right? Is that, there were, in fact, a core group of complete outlaw pirates operating in the Caribbean in the late 1600s and early 1700s. And it's from those stories and images that our depiction of pirates all the way up to Disney sort of happens today. But unlike a lot of other sort of historical phenomenon that then get, plucked up and drawn into popular imagination, the pirates were not romanticized at a later date. They started getting sort of romanticized from the very beginning. And it begins with these two particular books right here. The one published by Alexander Exculin in 1678 called Buccaneers of America. And so 1678, at the height when the pirates were actually still operating down there, a Dutch author produced this outline and sort of survey of who they were and what they were doing. And the way it was written, it was incredibly popular, and it was quickly translated into German and Spanish. And by 1684, it had made its way into English, and it made its way to both England and the Americas. And it fueled this romanticized sort of image right from the get-go. And then a few years later, a general history of the pirates was published in 1724 by a pseudonym, Charles Johnson. We're not 100% sure who Charles Johnson actually was in real life. A number of historians have long gone back and forth over whether it may very well have been Daniel Defoe, another author who produced a lot of sort of similar adventure stories. But either way, this too cemented the tales of these individual pirates who became sort of, heroic and known by name in their infamy. Johnson wrote not just about sort of Blackbeard and the rest, but also about Mary Read and Anne Bonny, who were notable as female pirates. So much so that I think helped sort of stir public imagination about it as well too. Throughout the next 100 years, these accounts are not only continuing to get reprinted, but are fueling other sort of popular accounts. But as they get reprinted, they begin to come with illustrations. And Jeffrey, we're going to take a look at the next one. We've got some copies of the illustrations. The most notable illustrations that we associate with pirates and that absolutely influence sort of the look of the pirates in the movie come from an artist named Howard Pyle, who was hired in 1887 to illustrate one of the original pirate books. And the imagery that he created was incredibly distinctive, somewhat based just on historical reality, but really helped capture public imagination about pirates. And you can take one look at these and see, wow, you can see the characters from all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies reflected here really quickly. Pyle's work became so popular in itself that even after he died in 1921, his publisher produced another volume called Howard Pyle's Book of Pirates that included all of the imagery he had produced for that original publication and several later ones. Pyle helped shape and cement sort of the visual look of the pirates. But in the meantime, those early books by Johnson and Exqueland were fueling all sorts of other novels by people like Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island, and Sabatini's Captain Blood. And those books from the 1800s in the 1900s ended up becoming the fodder for movies. But the one guy who probably more than anyone else became the pirate we think of when we think of the stereotype pirate is this guy. This is English actor Robert Newton, who portrayed Long John Silver in Walt Disney's 1950 version of Treasure Island. And when you think about the pirate accent, Jennifer, give me your best pirate accent.
Army mateys.
Right, exactly. If I say pirate accent, everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Army matey. Well, the pirate accent you can blame on this actor, Robert Newton. Newton is from the West Country of England, where there is a fairly distinctive accent that is kind of like what we think of today as the pirate accent. But when Newton got the role of Long John Silver, he really played up his own accent and exaggerated it to create this character. The character was so incredibly popular, he not only made that movie, but made another follow-up one with Disney as well. And that West Country accent became sort of the definition of the pirate accent as a result. Even all the way to today, where in America, we now celebrate Talk Like a Pirate Day, which is, I don't know, we've done stuff with it at the museum, haven't we, Jennifer? When is that, in September, I think?
It is, yeah, it's in September.
Yeah. There were real mariners coming out of the West Country, so it's not uncommon to have heard sort of that accent and that language among mariners on board. But even if all of this is sort of imaginary and fantastical, all of it, including some of the things that we see in the movie, do have some basis in historical reality. So as silly as some of Pirates of the Caribbean is, tonight we thought we'd kind of try and break down some of the things that from the movie that we know are kind of have some roots in reality.
Yeah. And I think one of those things for me is those relationships between pirates and kind of how we see them either be bonded and their loyalties that they have, such as Will Turner trying to rescue Elizabeth Swann and willing to die for her. And also their betrayals, with Captain Barbossa betraying Captain Jack Sparrow and marooning him on the island. But this movie is really about what does it take to be a pirate? What is the definition of being a pirate? And those relationships amongst the pirates themselves, as well as, you know, the citizens as a whole, the law-abiding citizens, I should say. So we see kind of these pirates being recruited into the, you know, Captain Jack Sparrow's crew in the movie. And it does represent some of the things that we do know about pirates. One, they generally served on other maritime vessels. We also see a real diverse crew in terms of gender as well as race. And so I think it's wild to watch a scene from Pirates of the Caribbean and just to kind of see some of the people that we will later get to know more in the movie.
All of them faithful hands before the mast. Every man worth his salt. And crazy to boot.
So this is your able-bodied crew.
You, sailor.
Cotton, sir.
Mr. Cotton, do you have the courage and fortitude to follow orders and stay true in the face of danger and almost certain death? Mr. Cotton, answer, man.
He's a mute, sir. Poor devil had his tongue cut out, so he trained the parrot to talk for him. No one's yet figured how.
Mr. Cotton's parrot. Same question.
When it is else! When it is else!
Mostly we figure that means yes.
Of course it does. Satisfied?
Well, you've proved they're mad.
And what's the benefit for us?
Anna Maria.
I suppose you didn't deserve that one either.
No, that one. I deserve.
He deserved, yeah. So just like that, we can see the crew starting to form, the bonds that are there or maybe not there in this particular case. But we get to see some of the different people that are attracted to being pirates of the time. And really, I think it had to do with economic incentives, you know, as well as where your morality was and how did you feel kind of out, you know, operating outside of the legal system. And I am particularly curious with our crowd today if we have any pirates potentially in our midst. So I am going to launch a poll, and there's several different questions, and I'm going to give us a time to answer it, and I want to see whether people are willing to adopt a life of piracy or not.
I don't know, Jennifer, are you sure this is something you want to find out?
I know, it might be a little dangerous, especially with me here at a museum. I feel like I have treasures all around me.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
All right, so we'll see how people are voting. So that first question is, do you serve others or yourself? And then the second question is, do you believe that any man that falls behind is left behind? Third, are you obsessed with treasure? Who isn't was one of the options. Do you have the courage and fortitude to follow orders and stay true in the face of danger and almost certain death? That was something that we just heard Captain Jack Sparrow ask. And then, are you a dishonest person? And in the movie, we hear that really you can only trust a dishonest person to maintain dishonesty. All right. So about half of you have responded so far. So let's see how we are doing. We'll give you a few more seconds to get those answers in. right, let's see.
Yeah, one of the things about, sort of the nature of piracy too was that we talk about that sort of morality and the presumed depravity. But you're right about the economic part too. A lot of it was just a question of having the right skills and being able and willing to go do it because opportunity presented itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too in a bit.
Yeah, we will. All right. So thankfully, most of our participants here are serving other people. So I am happy to hear that. Whether do you believe that any man that falls behind is left behind? Again, the majority of people are saying, no way. Are you obsessed with treasure is a little bit more even. It's interesting. And then, do you have the courage and fortitude to follow orders and stay true in the face of danger and almost certain death? We have some very brave sailors and potential pirates here in our midst. And then, are you a dishonest person? Well, most of our people do not consider themselves to be dishonest, which I personally appreciate. So
Right.
Good job. Think that we are in some good company, Carl. But I think
So you should be safe at the museum right now.
Okay, good. But I think most of our people may be better suited potentially for the Navy than being a pirate, which actually, as we see in Pirates of the Caribbean, is not necessarily completely just one or the other. So Mr. Gibbs, as we see in the beginning of the film, starts out as a British Royal Navy sailor. We see him on the USS Dauntless as Elizabeth Swan, as well as her father are coming over, and he starts his life legally as a sailor, but then later transitions to being a pirate. And this was something that happened, not frequently, but it was often the way that pirates started because the roles aboard and the skills that you need to be a pirate was very similar to either being a privateer or being a Navy sailor. So you still need to have a sailmaster, you still need to have a carpenter, you still maybe need to know how to operate those cannons. And so a lot of those skills are useful, whether it's legally or illegally. And we actually have an example of somebody that on USS Constitution started their career and then later turned to piracy. And that is James Campbell here. So James Campbell was a crew member aboard USS Constitution during the War of 1812. But by 1821, he was serving with John Lafitte as both a privateer as well as a pirate in the Gulf coast of Mexico. And eventually the band of pirates was broken up by the United States government, and James Campbell here continued to live his life until he was 70. So he had quite a long life as well as career out at sea, both as a sailor as well as a pirate.
Yeah, and a long life was one of the characteristics that didn't tend to follow a lot of the
That's
pirates
true.
who got caught. So Campbell lucked out on that regard. But he was far more commonplace in terms of what we were talking about with opportunity and financial gain, right? Campbell, like Gibbs in the movie, are active in the Navy. But the irony of piracy is that, when your nation is at war, there are more opportunities for sailors like Gibbs and Campbell to find employment either in the Navy legitimately or with privateers, seeking out legitimate prizes for their nation. But it's when peace rolls around and peacetime puts a lot of these sailors out of business because navies scale back and there's no use for privateers anymore, that many of them would find themselves going toward a life of piracy. As an alternative to going back to sort of merchant marine where they weren't making anywhere near as much money.
Yeah. So the other thing that we see amongst these crews as they are forming is this pirate code that we hear a lot about in the movie. And, I think one of the questions that we got before the presentation was how much of this pirate code is accurate? And it's kind of a yes and no, right, Carl? It is based off of somewhat of a code that individual pirate ships or captains would have their crew sign on to do. So it was something that the pirates had to agree, and the way that they would behave and act and how the treasure would be divided aboard a ship. But I think it's a little bit more fantastical to imagine this pirate code that all of the pirates in the entire world and in the entire Caribbean are kind of promoting and following. I think it's a little bit more fantastical. And then also to think about these pirate codes, another thing just to keep in mind, and we see Captain Barbosa mention it here, is the code is more what you call guidelines, in terms of the fact that once you have your agreement, it really is only as long as it is serving you and for your benefits, and again, for that economic gain. If it's not, I think most pirates would agree that it is mostly a guideline, and maybe they would, collectively regather and decide maybe some different codes that they were going to live by.
Yeah, it's not unlike, sailors who were signing on board USS Constitution in the Navy, in the sense that they were signing on to a set of ship's articles, an agreed upon set of rules that the crew would obey. The difference, of course, though, was that for the Navy, those rules are administered from the top down, right? And so if you become a member of the Navy, you don't really have a whole lot of say in that. Whereas the sailors were, more collectively sort of participating in the development of that.
Yeah, which again is, I know something that Carl and I have discussed is that, some historians really see this as one of the first kind of collectives. And sometimes they mention it's a democracy, not quite, but that it's kind of the start of that.
Yeah, there's definitely a thread of historians who look at this idea that by virtue of having a say, a share of the wealth and a say in management, that they were kind of like, workers who were running their own shop, right? As opposed to being sort of the wage earners working for management. These guys were own the means of production, if you will, or the means of a theft.
That's a good point. And I know that as pirates, they wouldn't necessarily get paid a based wage, right? It was all about what they were looting. Is that correct, Carl?
Yeah. You're not signing on to become a pirate for an hourly rate, which is part of the attraction, right? If you were a sailor, even 100 years later on Constitution, you were making a flat rate based on your role and your skill. But these guys were sort of more like acting on commission, right? They took the prize money from the ships that they looted and seized. The value of the vessel, its cargo, everything on board was distributed out in predetermined shares among the captain, the officers, and the crew. And that's actually bears itself in reality too, in that legal privateers and even official Navy ships who were seizing commerce of enemy commerce were not just doing so for the benefit of their nation, but were doing so because there was prize money. Because once it was adjudicated by a court on shore, the value of the ship and its cargo would be liquidated, and the crew got a portion of the cash that came back from that. And that was what kept privateers, legitimate, legal privateers, in basis, and why they were willing to hire on to seize enemy commerce during times of war. For pirates, however, it was more of an opportunistic chance to seize anything and anybody that they were, comfortable taking a shot at and thought would be a lucrative prize to grab.
Yeah.
One of the other characters, we talked about the crew and the relationships among the crew, but the other big character, I think, in Pirates of the Caribbean is the pirate ship itself, and the rest of the ships that are participating. They are part and parcel of the lore that comes with it. And in this really great opening scene within the first few minutes of the movie, we essentially get an introduction to those characters, to the ships themselves. Let's take a look at that.
But it seems to me that a ship like that makes this one here a bit superfluous, really.
Oh, the Dauntless is the power in these waters, true enough. But there's no ship that can match the Interceptor for speed.
I've heard of one. It's supposed to be very fast, nigh uncatchable. The Black Pearl.
Well, there's no real ship that can match the Interceptor. Black Pearl is a real ship.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. I've seen it.
You've seen it?
Yes.
You haven't seen it.
Yes, I have.
You've seen a ship with black sails that's crewed by the damned and captained by a man so evil that hell itself spat him back out.
No.
No.
But I have seen a ship with black sails.
Oh. And no ship that's not crewed by the damned and captained by a man so evil that hell itself spat him back out could possibly have black sails, therefore couldn't possibly be any other ship than the Black Pearl. Is that what you're saying?
No.
I love that. It creates sort of a characterization of, for starters, of our central, title character, right? The Curse of the Black Pearl is the subtitle of the movie, but also gives us an introduction to the two other ships that end up chasing the Black Pearl throughout this movie, the massive multi-deck gunned Dauntless and the Swift Interceptor right behind them. This is sort of fantastical too, in that, well, for starters, I don't have a whole lot of historical evidence that cursed crews of undead skeletons were a significant problem for commerce.
What?
I know, it's shocking to
The very
believe.
basis of the movie, Carl?
We're so convinced, right? No, it actually wasn't as big a problem as you might imagine, it turns out. Nor were it likely that most pirate ships were carrying black sails to announce themselves over the horizon. Not
I like to think of it as the equivalent of jazz hands and entering.
Yeah,
Here I am.
it's not a particularly stealthy way to make your approach when you're trying to seize a cargo by surprise. Hello, we're here. We're the evil black sailed ship. Sails did occasionally have colors to them, but the most common was what's known as tan bark. And tan bark sails were a reddish brown that were actually created from tannins in tree bark, almost identical to the process for tanning leather, and for the same reason, in that it provided a durability to the sailcloth and rot. But for the most part, all of our ships in this time period had relatively white ivory, kind of flaxen sails. But that's not the least of the sort of fantastical elements of this. This image is actually of one of the Black Pearl that was used in the movie. Over the course of this first movie and several others, they made several sort of real life floating Black Pearl ships, as well as some sort of stage mock-ups. But this vessel is a bit of a mashup of styles and design characteristics from across a variety of periods, and probably isn't anything that you would ever likely see in real life in detail. In this instance too, that it's missing its upper masts because, hey, they were only shooting from the tops down. But the other thing that makes this noticeable or notable as a would-be pirate ship is the absurd size of it. If you look closely at this photo, you can see sort of the bodies and people moving around on it. And this is a really big boat. And most of your pirate ships, surprisingly, were not that large for a variety of reasons. For starters, pirates weren't out building these mammoth vessels from scratch. If you were a pirate, you probably got your ship the way pirates got everything else. They stole it. And so the vessels they were stealing tended to be somewhat smaller merchant vessels. And even if they were a larger sort of three-masted, full-rigged ship, a sailing ship, transoceanic sailing ship, they tended to be of the smaller variety. But the real pirates, for a much greater percentage of instances, were utilizing smaller vessels that had more maneuverable rigs and hull designs. And that's kind of reflected in the Interceptor, one of the two other ships that shows up in the movie. In the movie, the Interceptor is played by this ship, the Lady Washington. And Lady Washington is a replica of a 1780s ship that was originally built for the Atlantic, but then ended up doing a lot of trading in the Pacific after the 1780s, in the 1790s. And as you can see, again, by comparing the size of the people that you can see on the deck, this is a lot smaller ship, which means that it needs a smaller crew, but it also means that it is a little bit swifter. So it's more maneuverable, which means that it can chase down its slow moving, merchant target. And then it can also run away and sneak into the shallow areas, hiding out from other privateers and also Navy ships that would be searching for it and hunting it down. And so all of those capabilities made this kind of vessel the much more sort of preferred and likely ship belonging to the pirates. But it still took something of a crew to sail. Right?
I mean, it didn't take two people. I mean,
what's that? Two people.
Two very capable people.
Yeah, there's a great scene in the movie, right, where the two of them just like take off and they steal the ship. Like, oh, they can't sail with the two of them, and then they do. You'd be pretty tough to do that. Even no matter how sort of skilled you might be, the physical sort of strength needed to raise yards, set sails, and do all that while still, manning a deck was something that took definitely more than two people. However, having said that, once the sails are set, right, and your course is set, it didn't take very many people to man a ship like this. And for merchant ships of this design variety, you could have crews of under a dozen, and even down to as little as 6 or 8 people who were operating it. And as a merchant, the merchant captains who ran these vessels, every extra crew member they hired was money out of the profit margin. And so unlike a Navy vessel that is trying to do everything very quickly and sharply because your lives and your ability to bring guns to bear depends on it, for merchants, if it took a little extra time for one person to do one thing and then another, and as a result, you sort of stumbled through your maneuvers, that was okay as long as you were, saving money in the long run from having fewer crew. Now, pirates operating these vessels would certainly carry more crew because of their desire to go take over other vessels. But here too, they're not itching to get into a fight. One of the images I think we have of pirates is this idea that there's always these big pirate battles. And we see a couple of those in this movie. Guns blazing, broadsides, boarding parties, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, pirates weren't itching to get into a fight. They wanted to get the money, get the cargo, and get out of there as quickly as possible. With as little or trouble as they, possibly could. So
the pirates are not really going up against a Navy vessel like USS Constitution with
no, and nor
50 to 500 sailors, 50 cannons, things like that.
Oh yeah. And nor would they have, even in the best of circumstances, right? If you look at some of the larger pirate vessels of the early 1700s, probably the most famous, Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard ship, had a large crew and a large number of guns, at least 30, maybe as many as 40 guns. but they were, nowhere near the size of the 24 and 32 pounders that Constitution was carrying. And, partly this is a product of a Navy ship, but it's also a product of 100 years worth of development. If we put it in context by comparing these ships to Constitution, for example, we compared this vessel, Lady Washington, portraying the Interceptor in the movie, to Constitution. This is a ship that, Constitution is a vessel that is 3 times the length of this ship. It's twice the draft, the depth of water it requires. And it's about 10 times the overall weight. So, it is, Constitution was dwarfing any of these ships, and even the largest of the pirate ships of the early period are far smaller than I think we tend to imagine them being. Yeah.
Pretty impressive either way. All right. So here we are starting to sail off into the distance in terms of activities and how they end the movie with the Black Pearl approaching to rescue one of its captains. So bringing both the crew as well as the ship together at the very end. Is there any other points that you really wanted to talk about, Carl, or that you felt were really important? I do see that we have some questions. So one of them being, what years were pirates a threat to American merchant ships? Which I think is pretty much
every year. Yeah, that's one topic we haven't really talked about. We tend to think until relatively recently, I think popular imagination imagined that pirates were in fact a thing of the past, and we only associate them with being in the Caribbean. But piracy is a worldwide phenomenon. It always has been, and it is continued, through to today. It started in the 1600s. Once settlers in the Americas and North America began shipping cargo to Caribbean colonies, which were being denuded so that they could grow sugarcane, and consequently needed all of their supplies coming from ideally North America, the closest place. Those merchant ships were, subject to potential pirates down in the islands. But that sort of, the nature of that opportunistic piracy continues through to today. Most notably in recent years, I think in public imagination, the idea of pirates off the coast of Somalia and Africa has sort of captured the public, in part thanks to the incidents with Captain Phillips that became another movie with Tom Hanks of an American ship seized by pirates there. But Somali piracy was just one place where that's happening, and it was a very sort of unique phenomenon there. Piracy continues to occur in other places where there is a lot of wealthy, maritime traffic passing through, and most notable for that is the Malacca Straits off of Singapore, which connect the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean. And because of that trade route, which is a sort of shortcut around all of the islands of that section of the Pacific, about a third of the world's cargo passes through there on a pretty regular basis. And it has made piracy for a long time there particularly notable. Currently, piracy is becoming more of an issue off the coast of West Africa, where booming oil economy, but a lack of oil refinery is causing opportunities for pirates to steal the oil cargoes of ships. And you still have some piracy in the Caribbean, but frankly, it's more robbery kind of piracy. It's yachts along the coast of South America that are robbed of personal possessions, but the vessels themselves not taken. If you're really interested in seeing what the current state of this is, you can actually go to the International Chamber of Commerce, runs a piracy reporting center in Kuala Lumpur. And on their website, they keep regular reports, live reports and maps of where piracy incidents are occurring. This is obviously information that's of interest to insurance, marine insurance agents, as well as shipping companies in general. But, for us at Constitution Museum too, piracy was one of the sort of founding issues that led to the creation of Constitution in a kind of different way, though. The American merchant ships were facing threats from the Barbary coast of North Africa as they were passing through the Mediterranean, and a substantial portion of American trade was going to the Eastern Med at the early years of the Republic. And it was because of that that the Navy, the U.S. decided to sort of reestablish a standing Navy. That was less outright piracy than sort of quasi-state sponsored seizure of vessels by nations that wanted tribute in exchange for safe passage through what they considered to be their territorial waters. And that is more in line with what was happening in Somalia, where the collapse of the central government there had led to a breakdown in the nation's ability to kind of protect its coastal waters. And so their fisheries got completely wiped out. And a number of them turned to seizing ships, not for the ship or the cargo, but to ransom the crew back to the merchants who were running it. And once one or two of them showed up with pockets flush with cash, it was an enticing alternative for others to join suit. So that's always been the case. Now, having said all of that, the sort of golden age of piracy that we think of was occurring in the Caribbean in the 1600s and into the early 1700s, largely driven by the competing kind of imperial interests in the Caribbean, where there was always European nations fighting over their colonies and ownership of them in the islands. But at the same time, Spain in particular was sending just an enormous amount of gold treasure out of Central and South America through these narrow passages that made them easy pickings before they headed out across the ocean back to Europe.
Very interesting. Yeah, piracy still definitely a thing today. I think I want to answer just kind of a quick, maybe fun question, Carl, which is, did the hats really serve a purpose, especially on top of the bandanas? Thanks, Kate, for this question. So I think hats aboard a Navy or any type of maritime vessel are extremely important to help keep the sun out of your eyes and to help you be able to do jobs that you see happening kind of on the spar decks or the top decks of these ships. Would they have these fantastical feathers and these really broad rims that you see in the movie? Not so much. That was much more a fantastical element of the movie. Not to say that we don't see some really kind of wonderful hats that are very decorative in the maritime trades, especially in the Navy, to denote rank. I don't think you would see something quite as flamboyant or beautiful or decorative as Captain Barbosa's hat.
Yeah. A tricorn hat also has the opportunity to like sort of shed the water off of your head too, right? So it's not rolling right down into your face. Yeah.
Very fun. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our second Maritime Movie Club discussion. I hope you learned something about both pirates, historical, as well as fictional during the discussion, as well as some information about USS Constitution. If you're interested in learning more about USS Constitution or interested in upcoming events, I recommend checking out the museum's website at usscm.org. And that's where you can find out a lot of additional information, both about USS Constitution, as well as other ships that were involved in that time period. And there's blog posts, there's artifact highlights, there's at-home activities, lots of fun things to explore.
Yeah, and this video, the video from this session of our movie club will be archived and available in a little while on where, Jen?
Yeah, so good question. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and then we will also send out the link to it in a follow-up email to everyone that registered today.
There you go. So don't hesitate to reach out to us via email if there's additional questions or things that you're interested in. And we are hopeful that Maritime Movie Club will continue. So if you have ideas on other sort of historic maritime films that you'd like to learn a little bit more about and have a discussion of, we are your Maritime Movie Club here at the museum. And Jennifer and I already have a couple other that we are fiercely debating over which one's going to be next on the winner, but there are plenty more out there. So let us know what you think, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and actually you can give us some of your suggestions as well as your feedback in a follow-up survey after this program. We really appreciate that, and we will incorporate it and always take it seriously as we plan future events. So thank you everyone again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and please reach out if you do have any questions as we start to plan out our future movie club. Are you still hoping for Captain Ron?
Oh, Captain Ron's a definite, yeah.
All right.
Captain Ron's high on my list, right? But for right now, the news is coming, so drink up me hearty, so ho, yo ho.
All right. Bye,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.